if the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, then what's the definition of Seattle? Hey, everybody, I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott, and this is Right Angle, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. Gentlemen, it came to my attention this morning over at my other job at PJ Media that things aren't going so well in Seattle, and that's with all caps, unexpectedly, and a great big exclamation mark. Post-millennial report. Now, I want to read this for these guys. I want to read to you from this post-millennial story, because this is just so much of what's wrong in our blue cities, all in one great story. As the Seattle City Council proposes $5.4 million in budget cuts aimed at the Seattle Police Department, police officers failed to meet response time expectations during the last 7 months of 2020, which, by the way, was the last time they cut budget and started doing the whole defund the police movement in Seattle, their own city council, and caused the retirement of almost 200 police officers, a huge record. Seattle Police expects officers to respond to priority one calls in 7 minutes or less, but the department fell short of that goal, surprise, as they face a dire staffing crisis. During the height of the autonomous zone last summer, if you remember that, that's, by the way, an actual insurrection if you're a Democrat and are unsure of the word. Former Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best said that response times were as high as 18 minutes, of course, in the very neighborhoods being terrorized by these groups that needed police protection the most. Bill, with this additional $5.4 million in cuts probably going to pass the city council, do you expect any changes in Seattle voter behavior?
First of all, it doesn't seem fair to me. It is true, if your numbers are correct, that the police are taking 11 minutes longer to get to these emergency calls, but it takes a little while to barge through those barricades, and then to get through the line of people holding hands across the street. Then, of course, you got to negotiate your way through the people that are throwing cinder blocks at you, and then you've got to set up a defensive perimeter around the person who's on the ground. These things take time, Steve, and I think that they're getting a bum rap on this. I really kind of almost have to go back to my feeling about all of progressivism. I simply do not understand how people can seriously claim things like this. I just don't know how you do it. Wasn't there like a classic headline that basically said something to the effect of crime rates dropping all across the nation, despite the fact we have record numbers of people in prison?
Yes.
Something like that, right? So I just don't know what to say. I think that the entire problem is, in terms of people's voting changing, they don't change their vote. They change their address, and then they vote the same. That's the disease. That's the problem. It's still very easy to move in this country, and you can have the benefit of your virtue signaling politics, make the place you're working or living in unlivable, move, and then screw that place up. And honest to God, that seems to be what's happening. If people didn't have the ability to move out of California as easily as they do, if they were to put, a fence around the state the way they should have quite a long time ago, and mines and no man's land and all the rest of it. But if they'd done that, then Californians would have had to live with the consequences of their insane voting decisions, and they would have changed them. But since nobody has to live with the consequences of their bad decisions, they can say to themselves, well, I'm a progressive and Seattle's a progressive city, and we're going to cut the budget of the police, and we're going to cut the budget of the police again. And now crime is unbearable, so I'm going to move to Texas, but at least I get to still be a progressive. And when I get to Texas, I'll make Texas more progressive too. And how many times do we come back to this issue? I don't think they're going to change their voting habits. I thought that there was no way that California would continue to vote the way that it did after what happened during the pandemic. And here we are.
Yeah, indeed. Well, Bill, you just made me think of something. If it's the smarter people who will recognize a bad situation first and get out, and it was basically the middle class in California that bugged out first, and that was your conservative voting base, it seems to me that Well, yeah, there's a lot of Californication going on in places like Colorado and originally Oregon, I think is where the word came from. The people that are left behind, the people who stay in California, seem like the ones most likely to keep voting for the things that they're actually getting, and it's self-reinforcing. And I don't know how to
just
escape
elaborate
that trap.
on that just for a moment. You're absolutely right. The people that leave are the middle class. The middle class leaves because they can. The poor don't leave because they don't have the means to leave. And the rich don't leave because none of this impacts them. They live in gated communities with private security overlooking the beautiful ocean and all the rest of it. And I don't think that the flight of the middle class is a bug for them. I think that's a feature. Mm-hmm. I really do. It means that they get to lord it over a less populated state filled with people who are dependent on the government, and then they get to be the little princelings that people like Gavin Newsom are so obviously enamored of being.
Yeah, over at Instaplanet, I've been using the phrase crisis by design to describe what's been going on our southern border since Biden was sworn in, but it occurs to me that maybe I could be using that for a lot more things.
Yeah, I bet you could.
All right, Scott, let's go to you. There are, according to this post-millennial story, currently 1,260 sworn officers in the Seattle Police Department. Again, that's down nearly 200 from the year before. So they're supposed to have about 1,450 or so police officers. Chief Diaz says that number is already too low. They're going to cut this $5 million out of the budget anyway. What occurs to me, Scott, is we on the right would be remiss if we didn't recognize, if we didn't acknowledge that there are real problems in police-civilian relationships, particularly in our urban neighborhoods. But is the solution to that, do you think, to cause less training for overworked police who will take longer and be more of a rush to stop some sort of crisis?
I think the approach taken from both sides of the political aisle is counterproductive at best, destructive at worst. And, the Democrats have squandered any opportunity they had to really be advocates of justice and equal justice for all by their starting position being, hey, let's hack the budget of law enforcement and then we'll start from there. The Republicans, frankly, squandered a great opportunity to highlight the dysfunction of these inner cities and these cities that have been run the same way for decades and decades, and reach out and embrace the people who live in those areas and say, look, we want justice for your families. We want your kids to grow up and go to college or grow up and start their own business. We don't think it's a good idea to incarcerate 2 million Americans. We don't think that that's the way to have a thriving society going forward. But that's the end result and the product of the kind of government that you've had for these many years. And so I think both sides have essentially focused on fundraising and slogans and ignored the genuine problems in these areas. It breaks my heart to think of the opportunity that lay before, especially conservatives, but Republicans in general, to finally walk into inner city neighborhoods and reach out to them and say, look, we've not been here for you. And frankly, your city's been run by people we disagree with. And here's why we disagree with them. This is why what's happened in these places has happened. But if all we say is more money for cops, then I think we ignore something that usually we're concerned about, especially those of us with a more libertarian bent, and that is state power, and specifically armed state power. For us to be the ones who are constantly cheerleading for violations of people's civil rights and armed state power. Not that we really say that, but in essence, we're willing to stomach that because we say, well, all these people are in jail and therefore there's less crime. That's not a solution either. And so it's frustrating to me from both sides, from the right, where I tend to find my home, it's sad, and to the left, where I think they have a legitimate opportunity to be able to step back from the extreme and actually find some justice for people. And both sides have said, look, I'd rather get reelected than get justice.
Yeah. Scott, you reminded me of something that occurred to me probably last summer when all this stuff started blowing up, especially with the libertarian streak that we share. The police can only be as good as the laws that they're required to enforce. So if you want better police, you don't need to shrink their budgets necessarily. You do need to shrink the number of laws on the books, the number of stupid laws. guys getting arrested, even killed in the street for selling single cigarettes. It's absurd. The things the police have to do that really have nothing to do with what we think.
Most of what is being called police
doing.
misbehavior, you're right, Steve, is actually police doing what they're supposed to do in most of those cases.
And obviously, the laws of economics apply to the police force too. The more money you have to spend, the higher quality people you can get. I mean, it's just simple.
But it's not enough to just get better people. You need better processes. You need a better vision of what the police are actually there for. And this idea that all of a sudden the police are the answer to every problem, and if somebody's having an argument with their spouse or with their next door neighbor, immediately the police have to get involved, or if somebody's got a mental health problem or a drug addiction and they're out in public, urinating on the side of a building, that's a police issue. That's not really a police issue. It's a mental health issue. It's an addiction issue. And we are asking the police to come in, carrying a firearm on their hip and say, you go in there and be the counselor.
Although we find when we get into these brutality cases, we find that very often it's the same guys. And in many cases, it's guys who were bad cops on previous police departments. And that's that when I found out that just continues, that's just mind-boggling.
Yeah, it really is. You got to get rid of these bad seeds. There aren't that many of them, but
no, there aren't that many.
Public sector unions make that just about impossible, unfortunately. Folks, it occurred to me when I was writing about this morning, there are actually two kinds of stupid people, if you'll allow me kind of a tangent here. There are people who are born stupid, and they deserve our compassion and our help and our instruction. Just help them out. I think people do just fine. But the more complicated ones are the people who are stupid on purpose. They could be smarter. They just choose not to learn. They choose to keep repeating the same things over and over again. And it kind of occurs to me that the problem is we've got people who are stupid on purpose, voting for more people who are stupid on purpose. So I think we've got the definition right, that insanity is doing the same, that something is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. We just have the wrong word being defined. It's not insanity, it's democracy. There's your right angle on that, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. Got to remind you that content like this needs sponsors like you. So if you're not a member, go to BillWhittle.com, hit join now, or make a one-time donation. You can even do that too. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.